Michael Turner believed that a promise once spoken to a child became something sacred, something heavier than money or exhaustion or fear, and on that cold December evening in Leavenworth, Washington, he reminded himself of that truth with every step he took along Front Street Park. Snow drifted down in soft, quiet flakes, settling on the rooftops dressed in Bavarian trim, clinging to garlands wrapped around lampposts, glowing beneath thousands of warm white lights that turned the small mountain town into a living Christmas card. Michael's boots were worn thin from years of road construction, his jacket faded at the elbows, yet his grip on his daughter's mittened hand was steady and sure. Emily was 7, light as a feather, her breath puffing clouds into the air as she stared wide-eyed at the towering Christmas tree rising from the center of the park, its branches heavy with ornaments and memory and hope. To her, this night felt like magic. To Michael, it felt like relief mixed with worry, because the entrance fee had cost him almost an entire day's wages, money he should have saved for heating bills or groceries, but he had promised Emily that no matter how tight life became, Christmas would never feel empty. He had made that promise 3 winters ago, standing beside a hospital bed as machines hummed softly, and his wife's hand slipped from his grasp, and ever since then he treated it like a vow carved into his bones. The festival buzzed with life. Families drifted past carrying cups of cocoa. Couples laughed beneath hanging lights. Children squealed as fake snow burst from hidden machines, and Christmas music floated through the air like a familiar prayer. Emily squeezed his hand harder, pointing at the carousel glowing at the heart of the park, its painted horses rising and falling as if they too were alive with wonder. Michael smiled despite the ache in his chest, that familiar mix of joy and grief that came every December, because moments like this reminded him why he kept going, even when the weight felt unbearable. They moved slowly through the crowd, Michael shielding Emily instinctively from elbows and rushing feet, his eyes always scanning, always counting, a habit learned from years of caring for a child who depended on him alone. Emily talked non-stop about school stories, about the snowman she wanted to build tomorrow, about how Mommy would have loved the lights, and Michael listened, letting her words fill the quiet places inside him. When she tugged him toward the carousel, he nodded, ready to give her another small joy, another memory strong enough to last. They were halfway across the open plaza, when Michael felt a sudden bump against his leg. Not the careless nudge of an adult, but something lighter, frantic, desperate. He looked down and saw a little girl clinging to his jeans with both hands, as if he were the only solid thing left in the world. She could not have been more than 6. Her white coat was trimmed with fur, far nicer than anything Michael had ever bought, but one shoe hung loose and her dark curls were wild, damp with tears. Her sobs came in sharp, uneven gasps that tore at his heart because he recognized that sound immediately. It was the sound of a child who believed she had been abandoned. Michael dropped to one knee without thinking, his breath slowing, his voice gentle, the way it always became when Emily was scared. The girl did not answer him. She pressed her face harder against his leg, trembling, holding on as if letting go might make her disappear. Emily knelt beside them, her small face serious, her eyes filled with concern beyond her years, and she spoke softly, telling the girl that everything would be okay, that her daddy was nice, that he would help. The sobbing slowed, just a little. Michael felt something tighten in his chest, a quiet understanding forming even before words were spoken. This night was about to change. He did not know how. He only knew that sometimes Christmas magic did not come wrapped in lights or music, but arrived disguised as fear, asking for courage in return. Michael could feel the little girl shaking even after her crying began to soften. Her fingers still twisted tightly in the fabric of his jeans, as if she feared the world might tear her away the moment she loosened her grip. He stayed kneeling, lowering himself to her level, careful not to rush, because he had learned through hard experience that frightened children needed time more than anything else. Emily stayed close, her small hand hovering near the girl's arm, offering comfort without forcing it. The noise of the festival continued all around them, laughter and music and the constant shuffle of boots on packed snow. But for Michael, the world narrowed to the quiet responsibility unfolding in front of him. He spoke slowly, using a calm, steady tone, telling her she was safe, telling her no one was angry, telling her that getting lost happened, sometimes even in the happiest places. After a moment she lifted her face just enough for him to see her eyes, wide and glossy, brown and brimming with fear that cut straight through him. When he asked her name, her voice came out small and broken as she whispered Grace. It was a simple name, gentle, and Michael repeated it back to her like a promise, telling her it was beautiful, telling her that he was Michael and this was his daughter Emily. He asked about her mother, what she looked like, where she had last seen her. But Grace only shook her head, tears returning as the questions reminded her of how suddenly everything had gone wrong. There had been too many people, she said, too much noise, and then her mom was gone. Michael listened without interrupting, nodding, letting her speak through the sobs because he knew she needed to tell the story even if it did not help them find the answer yet. His mind worked quietly while his face remained calm, scanning the crowd for someone who looked frantic, someone calling a name, someone moving with that unmistakable panic only a parent could feel. Everywhere he looked there were families smiling, hands full, faces turned toward lights and music. Whoever Grace's mother was, she had been swallowed by the same chaos that now kept her daughter trembling at his knee. Michael made a decision, one shaped by instinct and memory rather than logic. He told Grace they were going to find help, that the park had people whose job was to reunite families, that they would not stop until her mom was found. When he stood, Grace immediately reached for his hand, her fingers cold despite the expensive coat, and that simple, trusting gesture sent a dull ache through his chest. Emily took his other hand without being asked, her presence steady, her silence loud with understanding. Together they began moving toward the center of the park where Michael remembered seeing the security station earlier, a small building shaped like a gingerbread house near the main tree. The walk was harder than it looked. The crowd thickened with every step, people jostling past, unaware of the fragile fear threading its way through the moving bodies. Grace whimpered whenever someone brushed against her, her grip tightening until Michael lifted her into his arms without hesitation. The motion was automatic, familiar, muscle memory from years of carrying Emily through grocery stores and fairs and long winter nights. Grace wrapped her arms around his neck and pressed her face into his shoulder, her sobs muffled now, her breathing slowly evening out as she felt the steady rhythm of his steps. Michael murmured reassurance, telling her she was doing great, telling her they were almost there, while Emily stayed close at his side, her free hand brushing Grace's sleeve now and then, as if to remind her she was not alone. When the gingerbread-shaped security building came into view, Michael felt a flicker of hope that quickly dimmed as he saw the line stretching out the door. Parents stood shoulder to shoulder, clutching phones with photos glowing on cracked screens, their faces pale and drawn, each one wearing the same tight expression of barely controlled terror. Grace stiffened in his arms at the sight, her body recognizing fear even before her mind could understand it. Inside, voices overlapped, radios crackled, and exhausted security staff moved with practiced urgency, trying to do too much with too little. Michael waited his turn, rocking Grace gently, humming under his breath, the same tune he used to sing Emily to sleep when nightmares came. When he finally reached the counter, he explained calmly that Grace was lost, and that he had found her alone near the carousel. The young woman behind the desk listened carefully, scanning lists and screens, her eyes softening when she saw Grace clinging to him. There was no report yet, she said, and with a weary honesty she admitted they were overwhelmed tonight. The busiest festival of the year, too many families, too many children. Their teams were searching, but sometimes the fastest reunions happened when lost children stayed in visible, familiar places. Michael understood. The park was massive. Time mattered. He thanked her and stepped back outside, the cold air sharp against his face. Grace still nestled against his shoulder, Emily watching him closely. A plan formed not from authority but from empathy. Parents would search the places that felt safe, familiar, magical, and if Grace's mother was out there, scared and desperate, she would likely be drawn back to the heart of the park. Michael turned toward the carousel glowing under its canopy of lights, unaware that across the festival, a woman's world was already falling apart. The carousel stood like a beacon at the center of Front Street Park, its lights warm against the deepening blue of the winter sky, the gentle music floating outward in slow, patient waves that seemed to calm even the restless crowd. Michael moved toward it with measured steps, mindful of Grace's weight in his arms and Emily's small stride beside him, careful not to rush yet unwilling to waste a single moment. He positioned himself near the entrance, beneath a wide arch wrapped in red ribbon and candy cane stripes, a place visible from every direction, a place a searching mother's eyes would be drawn to without thinking. When he lowered Grace to the ground, He kept one hand resting lightly on her shoulder, a quiet promise that he was not leaving, that she did not have to face the spinning world alone. He explained softly that her mom might come looking here, that this was where families gathered, where memories were made, and Grace nodded, her tears finally slowing, her breathing steady enough to listen. The carousel horses rose and fell in an endless loop, their painted eyes bright, their gilded saddles catching the light, and Grace found herself watching despite everything, her fear loosening its grip inch by inch. Emily stood close, pointing out the details with gentle enthusiasm. The white horse with roses in its mane, the black one with golden hooves, the gray with ribbons trailing behind, and Grace began to ask questions, her voice small but curious, curiosity slowly replacing panic. Michael watched the crowd while listening to the girls, his body angled protectively, every sense alert. He lifted Grace onto his shoulders after a while so she could see better, so she could feel tall and safe above the swirl of winter coats and moving legs, and she clutched his hair with careful fingers, laughter flickering briefly across her face as the music carried her. For a moment she forgot she was lost, and that moment mattered more than Michael could explain. Around them, people gathered to watch the carousel, parents hoisting children up, couples leaning into one another, the festival pressing on with its cheer, unaware that somewhere nearby, a mother was unraveling. Victoria Holloway had always believed control was her greatest strength. It was how she had built a thriving technology firm from a small rented office, how she had survived the sudden loss of her husband years earlier, how she had raised Grace surrounded by structure and schedules and security. But control meant nothing now. She had turned away for less than a minute to answer a call she believed could not wait. A last-minute change tied to a charity event she was hosting the next evening, and when she turned back, Grace was gone. The sound that escaped her throat when she realized it did not sound human. It was raw, sharp, full of terror that stole the air from her lungs. She searched blindly at first, spinning in place, calling Grace's name again and again, as if volume alone could summon her daughter back. The crowd swallowed her voice. She pushed through families without apology, her expensive coat brushing against strangers who stared in annoyance, her heels slipping on packed snow as panic took over. Her security team responded immediately. 2 men trained to anticipate threats and manage risk, but this was different. This was not a boardroom crisis or a public relations nightmare. This was her child. They fanned out, communicating through earpieces, scanning faces, checking exits, but the updates came back empty, over and over, each one tightening the knot in Victoria's chest. Minutes passed that felt like hours. Her hands shook, her thoughts spiraled. Every news story she had ever read came rushing in, every warning she had ignored because she believed proximity and money could shield her from chaos. The Christmas lights that had seemed charming earlier now mocked her, their cheerful glow clashing cruelly with the fear clawing at her insides. She thought about the nights she had worked late, the mornings she had rushed Grace through breakfast, the weekends she had promised to spend together but spent on conference calls instead. Guilt layered itself over fear until she could barely breathe. She would give anything, everything, she told herself, just to hold her daughter again. When the message finally crackled through her earpiece that someone matching Grace's description had been seen near the carousel, Victoria did not respond with words. She ran. She pushed through the crowd with single-minded desperation, her composure shattered, her heart hammering as the music grew louder. And then she saw them. A man in a worn jacket, solid and unfamiliar, with Grace perched on his shoulders, pointing at the lights, smiling. Grace was smiling. Something inside Victoria snapped. Fear twisted into rage, into the primal instinct to protect at any cost, and she surged forward, her voice breaking through the music as she screamed for him to get away from her child. Victoria did not pause to think or observe or listen. She acted on pure instinct, the kind that erupts when a parent believes their child is in danger. She lunged forward, shoving through the stunned onlookers, and grabbed Grace with enough force to make the little girl cry out in shock as she was pulled from Michael's shoulders. Victoria clutched her tight against her chest, her heart racing, her breath ragged, her voice sharp and trembling as she shouted for him to stay away, for him never to touch her daughter again. Michael stumbled back a step, his hands rising instinctively, palms open, surrender written into his posture even as confusion and hurt flashed across his face. He tried to speak, to explain, but the noise swallowed his words, the carousel music blaring cheerfully in cruel contrast to the chaos unfolding beneath it. Grace began to cry in earnest now, her small body stiff with fear as she clung to her mother, overwhelmed by the sudden shift from safety to accusation. A crowd gathered quickly, drawn by the raised voices and the familiar hunger for spectacle. Phones came out, people whispered, security guards pushed their way through, radios crackling as they tried to separate emotion from fact. Emily stood frozen beside her father, her face pale, her eyes wide with confusion and fear as she watched a stranger scream at the man she trusted most. Michael felt a tight pain in his chest, not from the accusation itself, but from the way Emily pressed herself against his leg, the way her small body shook as she tried to understand what was happening. He forced himself to stay calm, to speak evenly when a guard demanded an explanation. He told them Grace had been lost, that he had taken her to security, that they had waited by the carousel so her mother could find her. Victoria barely heard him. Her mind replayed every nightmare she had ever imagined, every headline, every warning, and she hurled accusations without mercy, insisting he had been carrying Grace away, insisting he had no right to touch her child. The words cut deep, sharper than she knew, because Michael had lived his life trying to do the right thing even when it cost him. The moment cracked open when Grace found her voice through her tears. She begged her mother to stop, telling her again and again that Michael had helped her, that he and Emily had been kind, that they had saved her when she was scared. Her small hands reached toward Emily even as she clung to Victoria, torn between fear and loyalty. The truth settled slowly, painfully, like ice water through Victoria's veins. She looked at Michael then, really looked, and saw not a threat but a tired father with a frightened child, a man whose only crime had been compassion. Shame hit her hard, stealing her breath, making her legs feel weak beneath her. She tried to apologize, the words stumbling out uneven and raw, but the damage had already been done. The crowd lingered, the phone still raised, the moment already turning into something she would never be able to erase. Michael accepted her apology with a grace that felt undeserved, his voice steady even as his face remained pale, his arm tightening around Emily in silent reassurance. Victoria could not stay. She retreated into the crowd with Grace clutched tightly in her arms, her security team closing ranks around her, shielding her from the curious eyes, but not from her own guilt. She did not look back, unable to face the sadness she sensed would be waiting in Michael's eyes. 15 minutes later, she sat in a private lounge reserved for donors. Grace curled against her, finally calm, finally safe. The room was warm and quiet, but Victoria's mind replayed the scene on a loop, every harsh word echoing louder now that the fear had drained away. She saw Emily's frightened face. She felt the weight of her accusations settle into something unbearable. This was not how she wanted her daughter to learn about the world. This was not the example she meant to set. She closed her eyes and made a decision she could not ignore. She would find him again. She would apologize properly, not to ease her own conscience, but because some wrongs demanded to be faced head-on. And somewhere in the park, Michael held Emily close, trying to steady both of them, unaware that the night was not finished with them yet. Victoria did not wait long once the decision was made. Guilt has a way of sharpening resolve, and hers had settled into something heavy and unyielding that would not allow her to sit still. She handed Grace to a trusted staff member with instructions to stay close, then told her head of security to find the man and his daughter and to ask them, politely, to meet her. There was no entitlement in her voice now, no assumption that she could command this moment. When Michael and Emily were escorted toward the donor lounge, Michael felt every step like a reminder that he did not belong in places like this. He wiped melted snow from his jacket, smoothed Emily's hair, and told himself he was doing this only because leaving without closure would weigh on him just as heavily. The lounge glowed with soft light and polished surfaces, a world away from the cold festival air, and Michael kept his posture straight, his hand resting protectively on Emily's shoulder as Victoria stood to greet them. Grace slipped from her seat and ran toward them the moment she saw Emily, relief brightening her face, and the sight eased something tight in Michael's chest. Victoria spoke first, her voice unsteady but sincere, thanking them for coming, acknowledging that she had no right to ask after what she had done. Michael responded with the same calm understanding, repeating that she had been scared, that any parent would be. But Victoria shook her head, unwilling to hide behind fear. She apologized clearly and without excuses, naming the harm she had caused, the accusation she had flung, the fear she had put into Emily's eyes. Saying it out loud hurt, but it also mattered. Michael listened quietly, his expression thoughtful, not angry, and when she finished he told her he appreciated the apology, that he did not need anything more. That was when Victoria realized she did need more, not from him, but from herself. She wanted her daughter to see accountability, to see that mistakes did not have to be buried under power or wealth. She noticed how Grace hovered near Emily, their hands brushing, their smiles tentative but hopeful, and she commented on the kindness Emily had shown, how much it had meant to Grace when she was scared. Emily answered simply, explaining that she did not want Grace to feel alone, because being lost was the worst feeling. The honesty of it shifted something in Victoria, a reminder of a gentler world she had nearly forgotten. She offered compensation then, money or gifts, anything Michael wanted, and was surprised when he refused without hesitation, his voice polite but firm. It was not pride alone, she realized, but a sense of dignity that did not bend easily. In her world, generosity often came with strings, with influence, with expectation. Here was a man who wanted nothing, who had acted simply because it was right. The conversation drifted into quieter territory as the girls sat on the floor playing, laughter soft but genuine. Victoria found herself watching Michael more closely, noticing the way his attention never fully left Emily, how he tracked her movements even while speaking, how natural it all was. She asked him why he had helped Grace instead of leaving her with security, and he answered after a pause that he could not imagine doing anything else, that he would hope someone would do the same for his daughter if the roles were reversed. The simplicity of the answer stayed with her. For the first time in a long while, Victoria felt the edges of her carefully managed world soften. She extended an invitation then, almost without planning it, for them to stay a little longer, to let the girls play, to join her at the charity gathering later that evening, if they wished. Michael hesitated, discomfort flickering across his face, but he looked at Emily, at the way she smiled when Grace laughed, and he agreed to stay for a short while. Neither of them knew it yet, but something quiet and important had begun, not in the chaos of accusation, but in the courage to sit down and speak honestly after the damage had been done. The charity gathering unfolded just beyond the lounge, separated by glass doors that muted the music and softened the hum of conversation, and when Michael stepped inside with Emily at his side, he felt the familiar tightening in his shoulders, the instinctive awareness of being out of place. The room was filled with polished smiles and tailored clothing, voices smooth and confident, laughter measured and practiced. He could sense the quiet evaluations as eyes flicked briefly toward his worn boots and canvas jacket, then away again. Judgments formed and filed without a word being spoken. Michael had known this feeling his whole life, the sense of standing on the wrong side of an invisible line, and he reminded himself that he was here for Emily, not for approval. Victoria stayed near him without making a show of it, her presence calm and unforced, a subtle signal that he belonged simply because she said he did. Emily held his hand tightly at first, then loosened her grip as Grace tugged her toward a small table covered in crafts and sweets. The girls settled easily, heads bent together, whispering and giggling as if they had known each other far longer than a single evening, and Michael felt a small swell of gratitude that surprised him. It had been a long time since Emily had looked so relaxed around another child. Victoria watched them too, her expression softening in a way Michael doubted many people ever saw. She made polite introductions as they moved through the room, donors and organizers offering warm words that skimmed the surface. But Michael listened more than he spoke, content to remain a quiet presence. He noticed how easily Grace navigated the space, greeting adults with confidence, yet returning again and again to Emily's side as if anchoring herself to something real. At one point the crowd shifted suddenly, drawn toward a speaker near the front, bodies pressing closer together, and Grace was momentarily jostled, her balance wavering as a larger man stepped back without looking. Michael reacted before thought could catch up, crossing the space in a few quick strides and steadying her, lifting her effortlessly into his arms until the movement passed. Grace clung to him instinctively, her breath quick, then calm, her head resting against his shoulder in a way that spoke of trust more than words ever could. Victoria saw it all. She saw the speed of his response, the gentleness with which he spoke, the way Grace relaxed immediately, and something deep inside her shifted again. This was not a man performing kindness. This was someone for whom care was reflex, woven into every movement. When she thanked him, the words carried weight now, layered with understanding. The evening wore on, speeches rising and falling, applause swelling and fading, and Michael found himself seated beside Victoria in a quieter corner as the girls played nearby. Conversation drifted toward safer ground at first, the festival, the town, but eventually it edged closer to the personal, as honest conversations tend to do when walls lower. She asked about Emily's mother, and Michael answered simply, the loss still tender but no longer raw, explaining how illness had taken her near Christmas, how the season held both sorrow and determination for him now. Victoria shared her own loss in return, the suddenness of it, the way survival had demanded strength she had not known she possessed. There was no competition in their grief, only recognition. They spoke about parenting in fragments, about fear and exhaustion and the constant worry of not doing enough. And Michael said something that stayed with her long after, that loving a child meant being afraid every day and showing up anyway. As the evening drew toward its close, fireworks were announced, drawing people outside in a tide of anticipation. Emily was already drooping with sleep, her head heavy against Michael's chest as he wrapped his jacket around her. Victoria stood beside him under the burst of light and color, the sky blooming with gold and silver, and for a moment the noise faded, leaving only the quiet truth of two parents standing together, watching their children breathe, realizing that some connections were formed not through planning or power, but through showing up when it mattered most. The fireworks faded, leaving behind drifting smoke and a hush that settled over the crowd like a shared exhale, and Michael adjusted his hold on Emily as she slept, her small body warm and trusting against his chest. He was preparing to say his goodbyes, grateful for the kindness shown but ready to return to the simpler quiet of their small apartment, when Victoria spoke again, her voice softer now, less certain, as if she were stepping onto unfamiliar ground. She invited them to Christmas dinner, not as an event or an obligation, but as four people sharing a table, no guests, no schedules, no performance. The words surprised Michael enough that he almost laughed, then stopped when he saw she meant them. He hesitated, the instinct to refuse rising automatically, the fear of intrusion and imbalance pressing at him. But Emily stirred and murmured contentedly in her sleep, and Michael felt the weight of the night settle into something gentler. He agreed, quietly, without promises beyond showing up. Christmas Day arrived under a pale winter sun, snow dusting the streets of Leavenworth, and Victoria's old Victorian house stood warm and inviting, its grandeur softened by decorations clearly placed by small hands. The dining room in particular bore the marks of Grace's enthusiasm, paper snowflakes hanging unevenly from the chandelier, a pine centerpiece slightly off-center, candles glowing with imperfect charm. Victoria had insisted on doing it herself with grace, resisting professional perfection in favor of something real. When Michael and Emily arrived, Emily held a handmade card she had labored over all morning, her drawing of 4 figures beneath a Christmas tree earnest and crooked, the message simple and heartfelt. Grace accepted it with delight, pulling Emily away to show her treasures upstairs, their laughter echoing down the hall. The adults watched them go, a quiet understanding passing between them. The day unfolded slowly, without agenda. Michael cooked his grandmother's stuffing while Victoria tackled the rest, their movements occasionally colliding, their laughter unforced and genuine. The food was uneven, the conversation easy, and when they finally sat down to eat, Grace declared it the best Christmas dinner she had ever had, not because of the taste, but because it felt like love. Later, by the fire, Grace presented Michael with a small bracelet she had made, the word hero spelled in uneven beads, and he accepted it with reverence that made Victoria's throat tighten. Emily gifted Grace a drawing of the two of them holding hands, best friends forever written carefully at the top, and Grace clutched it as if it were priceless. As evening settled, the girls fell asleep near the hearth, their heads leaning together, fingers still entwined. Michael and Victoria sat watching the fire burn low, the quiet, heavy but comforting. They spoke of nothing and everything, of what it meant to be present, of mistakes made and chances given, of the strange way life brought people together through chaos. Michael admitted he had forgotten what it felt like to sit in a room filled with family, and Victoria confessed she had never truly had it, even before loss reshaped her world. When he asked what came next, she answered honestly that she did not know, only that she wanted to find out. He took her hand then, rough against smooth, warm despite the winter chill, and they sat that way until the embers faded. Two parents who had found something unexpected in a crowded park and chosen, quietly, to see where it might lead. The days after Christmas carried a different kind of quiet, one that lingered rather than settled, and Michael felt it in the early mornings when he packed Emily's lunch, and in the evenings when he sat at the small kitchen table, sorting bills beneath a flickering light. The festival felt far away now, like something imagined, yet its impact remained in subtle ways. Emily talked about Grace constantly, about the games they had invented, the way Grace laughed with her whole body, the promise they had made to see each other again. Michael listened, smiling, but beneath the warmth was a familiar worry, the knowledge that friendships were often fragile when lives moved in different directions. Victoria felt the same unease from the opposite side of the city. Her house was quiet again, orderly and efficient, but something essential was missing. Grace moved through her days with a new restlessness, asking when she would see Emily, asking why people could not just live closer together, questions Victoria could not answer with schedules or resources. It was during a meeting about Grace's private school winter program that the thought surfaced, uninvited yet persistent. The school offered enrichment activities, small classes, field trips, experiences designed to open doors early, and Grace spoke often of wishing Emily could come too. Victoria found herself imagining it, the two girls learning side by side, laughter filling hallways that often felt too polished. She hesitated before reaching out, aware of the imbalance her offer would create, but convinced that honesty mattered more than comfort. When she finally spoke to Michael, she framed it as an opportunity for Grace, a chance to keep a friendship alive, to give her daughter something real in a world that often felt staged. Michael heard the words, but what he felt was something sharper. Pride rose quickly, tangled with fear, the old ache of being measured and found lacking. He had spent years proving to himself that Emily was not missing anything essential just because life was modest. The idea of someone else paying for her education felt like charity dressed in kindness, and it cut deeper than he expected. His voice tightened as he responded, asking plainly if Victoria thought he was failing his daughter. The question surprised her, and she saw then the line she had stepped over without meaning to. She corrected herself, quickly but carefully, explaining that this was not about saving Emily or fixing Michael's life, but about Grace, about loneliness and connection, about two children who had found each other when neither was looking. The tension sat heavy between them, unsaid fears pressing against honest intentions. Before either could push further, Emily and Grace burst into the room together, breathless and laughing, arms wrapped around each other as if they had been apart for years instead of hours. The sight softened something in Michael, a reminder that this decision was not about pride alone, but about listening. Emily looked up at him with hopeful eyes and asked if she could go to Grace's school, mentioning horses and art rooms and stories that had clearly already grown in her imagination. Michael did not answer right away. He told her they would talk about it, that some choices needed time, and he meant it. Later that night, after Emily slept, he sat alone with his thoughts, weighing promises against possibilities. He remembered his wife's voice, steady and kind, reminding him that accepting help did not erase strength, that love sometimes arrived through others whether you were ready or not. Victoria spent the same evening pacing her living room, replaying the conversation, wondering if she had pushed too hard, if her desire to make things right had turned into another kind of control. She told herself that asking for help went both ways, that letting someone say no was as important as offering. Between them hung an unanswered question, fragile but alive, waiting for courage rather than certainty to shape what came next. Michael made his decision not all at once, but in pieces, the way most important choices come together, slowly and unevenly, shaped by quiet moments rather than dramatic ones. It happened when he watched Emily line up her crayons by color before starting a drawing, when he heard her humming while tying her shoes, when he noticed the careful way she saved half her cookie for later, as if she had learned early that nothing was guaranteed. She was resilient, thoughtful, kind, but she was also a child who deserved room to grow without carrying adult worries on her small shoulders. He thought about Grace, about how easily she and Emily had connected, about the laughter that had filled rooms that once felt empty, When he finally told Victoria he would consider the school arrangement, his voice was steady, his terms simple. It would be about the girls, nothing more. No favors, no expectations, no quiet debts that would hang in the air. Victoria agreed without hesitation, relief and respect mingling in her expression. She understood now that dignity mattered as much as generosity. The girls began seeing each other more often, playdates that stretched into afternoons, laughter echoing through spaces both modest and grand, the differences between their worlds slowly losing importance. Michael noticed changes in Emily, subtle but real. She spoke up more, asked questions with confidence, carried herself with a new ease that came from belonging somewhere beyond the small orbit of their daily routine. Grace changed too, her sharp edges softening, her need for attention less frantic as she learned the quiet comfort of shared imagination. Victoria and Michael found themselves talking more as well, conversations stretching beyond logistics into reflection. They spoke about work and exhaustion, about guilt and hope, about the strange weight of responsibility that came with loving a child more than yourself. There was no rush to define what was happening between them. It was enough to recognize trust forming, built not on grand gestures but on consistency. One evening, Victoria overheard a conversation at a donor meeting that stopped her cold. An organizer mentioned a construction contract that would require extended holiday hours, work through Christmas, spoken of casually as a minor inconvenience. When she realized Michael had declined a similar offer earlier to keep a promise to Emily, the memory struck deeper now. She thought about the Christmases she had half-lived, present in body but absent in spirit, her phone never far from reach. Later, she asked him about it, and he told her simply that promises to children were not negotiable, that showing up mattered more than any paycheck. The words stayed with her long after he left. She began making changes, small at first, leaving meetings earlier, turning off her phone during dinner, choosing presence over perfection. Michael noticed too, the way Grace's stories shifted, the way Victoria listened without distraction. It was not transformation overnight, but it was movement, and movement mattered. One snowy afternoon, as the girls built a lopsided snowman in Victoria's yard, Michael and Victoria stood watching, hands tucked into pockets, breath visible in the cold. There was no need to fill the silence. They had learned that some understanding did not need words. Michael felt a quiet gratitude settle in his chest, not for the opportunities offered or the problems eased, but for the simple fact that kindness had not ended the night it began. It had carried forward, shaping days, softening edges, and teaching them both that family was not defined by sameness, but by the willingness to walk forward together, even when the path was unfamiliar. Spring arrived slowly in Leavenworth, melting the last stubborn patches of snow and bringing with it a sense of renewal that Michael felt in unexpected ways. Life did not suddenly become easy, but it became steadier. Emily settled into her new school routine alongside Grace, their friendship deepening through shared projects and whispered jokes, and Michael found himself adjusting to mornings that felt less rushed, evenings that carried more laughter. He remained careful, protective of boundaries, determined that gratitude would never turn into dependence, yet he could not deny that having support eased pressures he had carried alone for too long. Victoria faced her own adjustments. She learned to step back without guilt, to let others handle crises that did not truly require her presence, to trust that her company could survive without her constant oversight. The world did not collapse. Instead, she discovered space to sit on the grass watching two girls chase butterflies, space to listen, space to feel. Her reputation remained intact. Her business continued to thrive, but something essential shifted as she redefined success not by expansion or recognition, but by connection. Michael and Victoria grew closer through shared routines, conversations that stretched late into evenings, honest exchanges about fear and hope. There was still hesitation, still the weight of past loss, but there was also laughter, the easy kind that came from familiarity. One afternoon, while repairing a loose fence at Victoria's house, Michael noticed how naturally she worked beside him, hands dirty, hair pulled back, no concern for appearances. It struck him then how far they had come from the rigid roles that once defined them. Grace and Emily raced past them, calling out plans for summer, and Michael felt a warmth he had not expected to feel again, a sense of possibility unburdened by guilt. Victoria felt it too. She watched Michael with his sleeves rolled up, focused and patient, and realized she trusted him not only with Grace, but with her own heart. The realization was both comforting and frightening. Neither spoke of it yet. They allowed the relationship to grow at its own pace, guided by the needs of their daughters rather than the expectations of the world around them. When summer arrived in full, they took a small trip together, not extravagant, just a weekend by a lake where the girls swam until sunset and fell asleep tangled in blankets. Michael cooked simple meals, Victoria read aloud, and the rhythm of it all felt right in a way that did not need explanation. One evening, as they watched the sky deepen into purple and gold, Victoria thanked Michael again for the night at the festival, for the kindness that had changed everything. He shook his head, smiling softly, and told her that sometimes doing the right thing opened doors you did not even know were there. He did not frame it as destiny or reward, just as consequence. They sat side by side in comfortable silence, the water reflecting fading light, and both felt the quiet certainty that whatever lay ahead would be faced together, with honesty, patience, and the steady presence that had brought them this far. Autumn returned to Leavenworth with a gentle confidence, leaves turning gold along the riverbanks, the air sharp enough to remind everyone that nothing stayed the same for long. Michael noticed how different this season felt from the last. There was no dread hanging over the calendar, no silent counting of bills or lonely evenings waiting to be endured. Emily moved through her days with an ease that still surprised him, her friendships steady, her laughter frequent, her world broader than it had ever been. Grace thrived as well, her once restless energy settling into curiosity and creativity, her bond with her mother deepening as Victoria continued to choose presence over pressure. The four of them had fallen into a rhythm that felt natural. Shared meals, school events, weekend walks through town, the small rituals that quietly built a sense of belonging. Still, uncertainty lingered at the edges. Michael felt it when he considered the future, when thoughts of commitment brushed against the memory of loss. Loving again meant risking pain, and he was not sure he was ready to expose Emily or himself to that possibility. Victoria wrestled with similar fears. She had rebuilt her life through discipline and independence, and the idea of intertwining it with someone else felt both comforting and destabilizing. One evening, after a school play where Emily and Grace stood side by side on stage, their voices blending confidently, Michael and Victoria lingered in the empty auditorium. The applause had faded, leaving behind the echo of shared pride. Michael spoke first, admitting his fear, his worry about repeating the past, about promising more than he could guarantee. Victoria listened without interruption, then shared her own hesitation, the fear of losing control, of being vulnerable in ways she had long avoided. They did not rush to reassure each other. They acknowledged the fear as something real, something earned. In doing so, they found relief. Trust, they realized, did not require certainty, only honesty. The girls ran back into the room, breathless and excited, breaking the heaviness with laughter, and Michael felt clarity settle in. Life would always carry risk. Shielding themselves from it had never kept them safe, only alone. As winter approached again, decorations returning to shop windows and lights appearing along Front Street, Michael reflected on how far they had come from that single night of chaos. He thought about the promise he had made years earlier, that Christmas would always feel magical, and understood now that magic was not about spectacle, but about people. Victoria felt it too, standing beside him during the annual lighting ceremony, Grace's hand tucked into hers, Emily leaning comfortably against Michael's side. They did not need grand declarations. The warmth between them was enough. When Michael reached for Victoria's hand, she took it without hesitation, a quiet affirmation that they were ready to move forward, not in denial of fear, but alongside it. Snow began to fall again, soft and steady, and for the first time in years, both of them welcomed it without reservation. Winter settled in with a familiar calm, the kind that no longer felt threatening but instead carried a sense of return, and Michael noticed how different this second December felt as the town prepared once more for the Christmas festival. Lights were strung along Front Street again, wreaths appeared in shop windows, and the scent of pine and cinnamon drifted through the air. But this time, there was no knot of fear in his chest, no quiet bracing for loneliness. Emily counted down the days with excitement rather than sadness, talking about skating with Grace, baking cookies, and choosing ornaments together, and Michael listened with a grateful heart. Victoria moved through the season with a softer pace as well. She still worked hard, still carried responsibility, but she no longer let it consume every corner of her life. Grace noticed the change most clearly. Her mother laughed more easily now, lingered longer at bedtime, asked questions and truly waited for answers. The closeness between them deepened, not because of grand gestures, but because of steady presence. As the festival approached, the memory of the previous year surfaced for all of them, not as pain, but as perspective. Michael remembered the fear in Grace's eyes, the accusation, the humiliation, but also the courage it had taken to stay kind in the middle of chaos. Victoria remembered the terror of losing her child, the shame of her reaction, and the humility that followed. Together, those memories formed something steady, a shared understanding that mistakes did not have to define endings. On the night of the festival, they returned to Front Street Park as a group, walking side by side through the glowing lights, the girls racing ahead, their laughter carrying across the snow. When they reached the carousel, Michael paused, watching the horses rise and fall, the same music drifting through the air, and felt a quiet gratitude for the way life could circle back with new meaning. Victoria noticed his stillness and squeezed his hand gently, not asking, simply acknowledging. They stood there for a moment, letting the past and present exist together without conflict. Emily tugged at Michael's sleeve and asked if Grace could ride the white horse this time, and Grace nodded eagerly, her fear long replaced by confidence. As the carousel turned, Michael and Victoria stood shoulder to shoulder, not speaking, both aware that this place had marked the beginning of something neither had planned but both now cherished. Later, as fireworks lit the sky once more, Michael held Emily close, her head resting against his chest, and felt a deep sense of fulfillment. He had kept his promise. Christmas still felt like magic, not because life was perfect, but because love had found room to grow. Victoria watched the scene unfold, her daughter safe and happy, and understood that control had never been the source of her strength. Connection was. When the cold deepened and the crowd began to thin, they walked home together through falling snow, 4 sets of footprints overlapping, blending into a single path. There was no certainty about the future, no guarantees beyond effort and care, but there was trust, and that was enough. That night, as the girls fell asleep talking about plans and dreams, Michael and Victoria sat quietly, listening, and felt something settle into place. They had not replaced what was lost. They had honored it by choosing to live fully again, and in that choice, they discovered that family was not something you were born into alone, but something you built patiently, bravely, through kindness, forgiveness, and the simple act of showing up, even when the night was cold and the world felt too crowded to navigate alone. As the weeks passed after the festival, life settled into a quieter rhythm that felt earned rather than accidental, and Michael found comfort in the ordinary moments that once seemed small but now carried weight. Morning drives to school were filled with easy conversation instead of silence. Emily and Grace trading stories from the back seat while he listened, occasionally catching Victoria's eye in the rearview mirror and sharing a smile that needed no explanation. They were no longer circling each other cautiously. They were moving forward, slowly, with intention. Michael still worked long hours, his hands rough and tired at the end of each day, but he no longer felt like he was carrying the world alone. Victoria respected his boundaries, never stepping in unless asked, never offering solutions where listening was enough. That respect mattered more to him than grand gestures ever could. Victoria felt the shift too. For the first time since her husband's death, she allowed herself to imagine a future that did not require constant vigilance. She learned that strength could include leaning, that leadership at home meant showing uncertainty without apology. Grace noticed these changes in quiet ways. She slept more soundly. She laughed more freely. She no longer asked where her mother was every time Victoria stepped out of the room. Emily, too, grew lighter, her sense of security deepening as her world expanded without pulling her away from the center Michael had built so carefully. One evening, after the girls had gone to bed, Michael and Victoria sat at the kitchen table with mugs of tea growing cold between them. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that invited honesty. Michael spoke about his fears again, not as confessions, but as truths he no longer wanted to hide. He talked about the nights after his wife died, about the promise he made to never let Emily feel abandoned, about the guilt that surfaced whenever he felt happiness creeping back in. Victoria listened, her expression open, and when he finished, she reached across the table and rested her hand over his, She told him grief was not a debt that had to be paid forever, that love did not erase loss, it honored it. The words did not magically heal him, but they settled gently, like something he could carry without strain. Victoria shared her own struggle, the fear of being known beyond her accomplishments, the worry that if she stopped proving herself she might disappear. Michael surprised her by laughing softly and telling her she was impossible to miss, not because of success, but because of the way she showed up for Grace, the way she paid attention, the way she chose kindness even when it was uncomfortable. The honesty between them felt fragile and strong at the same time, like something living that needed care rather than control. That night marked a quiet turning point. They did not make promises, they did not name what they were becoming. They simply agreed to keep choosing each other, one day at a time, in ways that felt right to their daughters and to themselves. Spring hinted at its return, and with it came small plans for the future. A shared garden, summer hikes, school events attended together without explanation or pretense. None of it felt rushed. It felt steady. Michael watched Emily one afternoon as she worked on a school project with Grace. Their heads bent together, and felt a surge of gratitude so strong it almost hurt. This was not the life he had imagined years ago, but it was one he could stand inside with pride. Victoria felt something similar as she watched Grace curl up beside Michael during a movie night, comfortable and safe, trusting in a way that reassured rather than frightened her. Trust, she realized, was not lost by sharing it. It multiplied, and in the quiet understanding that grew between them, both adults recognized the same truth. Love did not arrive to fix what was broken. It arrived to sit beside it, to grow around it, and to create something new without asking the past to disappear. They were not replacing what they had lost. They were expanding what they were willing to hold. By the time summer returned again, warm and generous, Michael realized that what had once felt fragile now felt rooted, not because life had stopped changing, but because they had learned how to change together. The girls grew taller, louder, more certain of their place in the world, and their friendship remained a constant thread woven through school days, weekends, and long evenings spent chasing fireflies or reading on the porch. Emily no longer asked if things would last. Grace no longer feared being left behind. Their certainty was quiet but complete. Michael and Victoria moved with the same steadiness. They learned each other's rhythms, when to speak and when to wait, when to offer help and when to trust the other to handle things alone. There were disagreements, moments of tension shaped by old habits and old wounds, but they did not turn away from them. They talked, sometimes awkwardly, sometimes emotionally, but always with the understanding that walking away was no longer an option they wanted. Michael continued to work hard, proud of providing, but he also allowed himself rest without guilt, learning that being present mattered as much as being responsible. Victoria stepped back from roles that drained her and leaned into the ones that nourished her, discovering that leadership at home meant modeling balance, not perfection. One evening, during a small neighborhood gathering, someone referred to them casually as a family, and the word landed gently rather than heavily. Neither corrected it. Later that night, Michael asked Victoria how she felt about it. She admitted the word scared her, but it also felt right. He told her the same. They agreed that family was not something declared, but something lived, built through everyday choices rather than formal definitions. As autumn approached once more, bringing with it the familiar crisp air and the return of school routines, Michael reflected on how far they had come from that winter night at the park. He remembered the fear, the accusation, the humiliation, and realized those moments no longer held power over him. They had been transformed into something meaningful, a starting point rather than a scar. Victoria felt that transformation too. She no longer saw that night as her worst failure, but as the moment she was forced to confront her limits and choose humility over control. Together, they had turned chaos into connection. On a quiet evening, as the girls worked on homework side by side, Michael and Victoria stood in the kitchen preparing dinner, moving around each other with ease. He reached for her hand without thinking, and she squeezed it in return. No words were needed. They both knew what this meant. It was not a promise carved in stone, but it was a commitment shaped by trust. They were building something not out of obligation, but out of choice. When Michael tucked Emily into bed that night, she looked up at him and asked if things were going to stay like this. He kissed her forehead and told her honestly that life always changed, but love was something you carried with you wherever you went. She smiled, satisfied. Victoria had a similar conversation with Grace, who asked if Michael would still be around. Victoria answered simply that people stayed when they chose each other every day. Grace nodded, already knowing the answer in her heart. As the house settled into sleep, Michael and Victoria sat together, the quiet, comfortable and full, aware that what they had built was not perfect, but it was real. And real, they had learned, was more than enough. Michael woke early on Christmas morning to a stillness that felt different from any he had known before, the kind that settled deep in the bones and carried gratitude instead of ache. Snow rested gently along the edges of the porch and rooftops, untouched and pure, and for a moment he simply stood there, coffee cooling in his hands, listening to the quiet breath of a house filled with sleeping children. This was not the Christmas he had once imagined, but it was the one he had chosen, shaped by courage, forgiveness, and a willingness to open his life to something new. Emily stirred first, padding into the kitchen with sleep heavy in her eyes, followed closely by Grace, who had spent the night giggling and whispering until exhaustion finally claimed her. Their laughter filled the space as they rushed toward the tree, and Michael felt a familiar tightening in his chest, softened now by peace rather than grief. Victoria joined them moments later, hair loose, smile unguarded, her presence steady and warm. They opened gifts slowly, savoring each moment, the girls more interested in sharing than in counting, and Michael realized how deeply that simple truth reflected the life they had built together. After breakfast, they bundled up and stepped outside, footprints marking fresh snow as they walked through the quiet neighborhood. The world felt smaller and kinder in those moments, as if it had slowed down just for them. Michael watched Emily walk between him and Victoria, her hand reaching for his while her shoulder brushed Victoria's side, completely at ease. And he knew then that safety was not about walls or wealth or certainty. It was about people who stayed. Later, as the girls played, Michael and Victoria sat side by side, reflecting on the journey that had brought them here. Victoria admitted that losing control had taught her more than success ever had, that learning to trust had been the hardest and most necessary work of her life. Michael told her that keeping promises had saved him, that showing up even when afraid had opened doors he never knew existed. They did not speak of forever. They spoke of now, of choosing each other each day, of honoring the past without living inside it. As evening approached and the house filled again with warmth and light, Michael looked around and felt something settle into place. Home, he realized, was not a location or a title. It was the feeling of being seen, of being safe enough to rest, of knowing you were not walking alone. The story that began with a lost child in a crowded park had grown into something deeper, something enduring, because kindness had been chosen over fear, humility over pride, presence over perfection. And that was the lesson Michael carried forward, the one he hoped Emily would remember long after the lights were packed away and the snow had melted. Life would never be free of chaos or loss, but in the middle of it, there would always be moments when a hand reached out, when a stranger chose to help, when family was formed not by blood, but by love. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to reflect on the people who make you feel safe, the ones who show up when it matters. Share your thoughts in the comments. And if you believe in stories that remind us of kindness, presence, and second chances, please like and subscribe. Sometimes the greatest gifts arrive quietly, asking only that we notice them and choose to hold on.